Welcome to the Mark Twain Library Travel Dreaming tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We are just going to wait a moment as everybody begins to arrive and log in. Again, if you're wondering where you are on a fantastic conversation called Epic Australia today with an amazing guest that we have coming all the way from New South Wales. So it is his morning. But right before we get started, I do want to go over a few housekeeping notes just to make sure that you know, first and foremost, this is being recorded. We certainly understand that you may have to get up or you may have to attend to something of a matter. If that happens, please know that you can always receive these recordings on YouTube. We find many people like to share them afterwards or go and seek out some friends to watch them a little later. So the Mark Twain Library YouTube channel will feature this recording probably within the next week. Stay tuned if you need to see it. Other housekeeping notes, we welcome you to ask questions and certainly make this a very active and lively discussion. So please feel free to use the raise hand feature, the Q&A feature, the question feature, and we will certainly pause in the middle or ask questions at an appropriate time, but all questions will be answered to the best of our ability throughout the program. As you're probably wondering, this is part of a series itself. It is called Travel Dreaming with Mark Twain Library. I am Angela Caes and thrilled to be a member of the Adult Programming Committee. We are a committee that comes together and thinks of all the different ideas of programming that we could possibly bring. And I just happen to bring a passion and a love and a background in travel. I am Fernleaf Travel, and so these are some of my goofier pictures of me in Australia, just to give you a sense. I'm a great big ham, but what I really do is engineer memories. Local business here, and we do things big, small, you name it, all the way to Australia, all the way around the corner. But certainly a travel company that has its heart based here in our roots in Connecticut, and also mind based globally. And with that, I get the joy of centering ourselves today in Australia. So let's talk about Australia for a minute. Today's program is all about travel dreaming. We know that you may have desires to travel to Australia before, now, in the future. You may be thinking, how do I get there? What are the more interesting things to do? What do I pack? How do I possibly take this 6th largest country in the world, also a continent, and see it in an appropriate way? How many days do I need to go? So you may think, what a huge country. But again, there's only about 27 million people living there, and 85% of the population live in major cities. One of the more interesting facts that I love about Australia is that it has one of the highest life expectancy in the world. 82.5 years, folks. And Paul will have to share with us the reason why, but I believe it's because they have a thirst for adventure, a zest for life. And if you are someone who has been there before, or you're certainly going to travel there in the future, you will see this firsthand yourself. So just as we welcome everyone in, I'm going to double check that everyone has their place. As we're looking in, can everyone look at the question and answer feature? I'm going to make sure you know where it is so we answer all of your questions. I guess the first question most people ask about Australia is, have you been? Do we have anyone who happens to be on the line right now? You can always chat yes, no. Have you been to Australia itself? Just out of curiosity. We do have some experts in the house, so we will have to be on our toes and certainly welcome teaching you more. And for those of you who are just joining in, we will be here to answer all of the questions as well. So with that information, I am going to continue forward and get off my stage because this is not my program today. I am delighted to introduce Paul Groves-Berry from Southern Crossings. And I need to tell you a little bit about this group. If you have ever heard of the Travel and Leisure A-List, Wendy Perrin Top List, Condé Nast Top Travel Specialists, this is the group for you. They are not only local, specialized, but also they have a passion about where they go. And why is that? Well, it's unique itineraries, exclusive access, positive client testimonials. So without ado, I'm going to say hello to Paul. He has 2 daughters. It is his morning in Australia, but he was not only born and raised in Melbourne, but also thrives moving all over the country and learning about it, so that he not only puts together one of the most unique itineraries for people, but also ones that really bring people into the power of travel through seeing a destination like Australia. So over to you, Paul. Welcome, and thank you for joining us here at the Mark Twain Library.
Great. Thank you, Angela. And thank you to everyone who's joined. It's a real privilege to be able to spend some time with you tonight and talk about a place that I happen to love, because it is the place where I was born. And I think I'm so fortunate to work in a role where I get to talk about a destination that is really, really special. And hopefully today we'll be able to share some details of some great things to see and do and think about, and answer some questions that you have about traveling to our part of the world. So I'm the General Manager of Southern Crossings, based in Sydney, and we're a company that operates and sells travel to Australia, as well as some other destinations such as New Zealand and the South Pacific. And as Angela has mentioned, one thing that we've really specialised in over the years is creating itineraries to really tailor that are very much tailored to the individual needs and interests of the people who are coming here. So one thing I think I can say for sure is that Australia is very much a destination that has something for everyone, whether it be incredible scenery, incredible and unique wildlife, great weather, great food and wine experiences, culture, sport. We literally have got everything that you can possibly want. So there's many stories in Australia, and today the presentation is hoping to share with you a little bit about those stories. And to start off, I think the essential Australian story relates to this image here, and the fact that Australia is a country that has a very, very long history, a very ancient civilization that's been living and inhabiting the lands here for a huge amount of time. And this is a monolith called Uluru, which is in the center of Australia. It's often called the Red Heart of Australia. And it's a very important monument to the Indigenous peoples of Australia. So our First Nations peoples have inhabited this land for around 60,000 years. And as a result, it's one of the oldest surviving cultures in the world. These people of Australia, the Indigenous Australians, are really the very first Australian storytellers. And in fact, their culture has a concept within it called the dream time. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but the dream time is the way that the Indigenous people of Australia have passed down the stories of their people, passed down the stories of the land and the native features of the land. And basically that's the way that they use stories to tell, for example, how the rock at Ayers Rock or Uluru was created, and then how a river was created and why the kangaroo exists. They've got all these stories about the creation of those different things within the country. And as I said, they're the very first storytellers. So what I thought I'd do today is, in fact, tell some stories about some other people who have had an influence and have some interesting little quirks and places that they've visited that might inspire you to think about Australia as a place to travel to. The first person I want to talk about is this man here, a man called Captain James Cook, who of course was from England. And he's an English explorer that traveled around the world to many locations, including to Down Under, as we call it, or as we're known, I should say, in the late 18th century, around 1770. So he came down here as part of a trip to Tahiti, where he was going to watch some star, I think it was the Venus that was meant to be traveling past the sun or something. But on his journey, he was also given the task of trying to discover and unearth the sort of legendary Great Southern Continent that many people at the time in the 18th century believed existed, but hadn't really been able to properly understand what it was and where it was and what was in it. So he set out on a ship called the Endeavour and travelled down. And during the time that he was traveling, he kept really meticulous records of the things that he had seen and the places that he had been. And he was also an expert map maker. So he charted a lot of the east coast of Australia and also New Zealand on those journeys. So he traveled around, and one of the places that he came close to, I won't say he came to, but came close to, is the location where Sydney is now based. So he actually landed with his ships in a place called Botany Bay. And Botany Bay is a little bit south of the city of Sydney. It's actually the home now to our international airport, which is a beautiful sort of closing of the circle. The first place that the British landed is in fact the place where people land when they come here on a holiday. You can see there by that Sydney is really a very special place. And I'm sure if he had landed in Sydney Harbour rather than in Botany Bay, maybe he would never have left, because it's ringed by, it's got beautiful water, it's got beautiful freshwater rivers running nearby, incredible beaches, bushes, lots and lots of amazing natural features that are also really complemented by obviously the beautiful city that's been built with things such as the very famous Harbour Bridge and Opera House that you can see in the photo there. One of the things that we always recommend to people when they come is to, in some way, shape or form, get out on the harbour, because it's really, truly the best place to see the city from and to understand why it's such a special place. So you can do that on a harbour boat like that, on a boat like that, a sunset cruise, you can go kayaking, there's all sorts of things. You can even just jump on what we call the ferry, the Manly ferry, that takes you from Sydney across to one of the beautiful beaches on the north side of the city. So definitely, I would imagine anyone who comes to Sydney, to Australia, always has Sydney on their list, but that's not what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about some of the more exotic locations, and this is one of them. So when Captain Cook left from Sydney, he actually travelled and sailed north with his ships. And as I said, on the way, he was charting the land and making maps, and he travelled to some really incredible places. So this is an area called the Whitsundays, and it has around 74 different islands. And so this chain of islands was something that he was trying to navigate. And once he finally found the passage that he could travel through, he named it the Whitsunday Passage, because at that time, Captain Cook thought that it was Whitsunday, which you would know is a religious holiday that takes place about 7 weeks or so after Easter. As it happened, he had already crossed the international date line, so it was technically Whit Monday, but the name stuck. And now the Whitsundays is a very famous destination in Queensland, where lots and lots of visitors, both domestic and international, go to explore and look at you can see the scenery there. Whitehaven Beach is one of the most beautiful beaches in the whole world, I'm going to say, because we have a lot of great beaches here. But yes, you're traveling through an area then in the Whitsundays, which was named by Captain Cook on his, first voyage to the country to explore. He continued north, and when he was traveling even further north, he was traveling along the Great Barrier Reef. So the Great Barrier Reef is named the Great Barrier Reef, not just because it's great to look at and beautiful, but also because of its size. It's around 2,000 kilometers in length from bottom to top. So the Whitsundays are sort of near the bottom. Lizard Island is quite close to the top. And he was traveling up there. And as you can imagine, those sorts of journeys don't always go according to plan. And in fact, they ran into some reefs. They ran aground on some reefs and had to stop for a period of time, a couple of months, to do some repairs on the ships. And while they stopped, they were near to this place called Lizard Island, which was actually named by him. So it was on the 12th of August in 1770 that he came onto the island. And in his journals, he commented, "The only land animals we saw here were lizards, and there seemed to be plenty," which occasioned to me to name the island Lizard Island. So it's quite a cool story that you can actually travel somewhere where that Captain Cook himself, one of the great explorers in the world, in the history of the world, stopped and stood there. And in fact, he went onto the island and took a walk up to one of the highest points on the island so that he could stand and sort of look out over the water and the reefs and try and work out a safe way to travel with his ships. So now on the island, there's a place called Cook's Look, which is where he stood at the top and looked out over it. So when you're staying at the island, you can actually go and do that walk, and you literally walk in the footsteps of Captain Cook up to the lookout where he looked out over the waters. This is a quick photo of one of the lizards, which are still there. And that's just one that I took when I was there a few years ago. They wander around and they walk on the beaches and on the, around on the grass and things. So they're pretty cool. Now, obviously, not much has changed in terms of the nature of Lizard Island, and in fact, it's a national park actually. So the vast majority of the land in that area is a marine national park. But fortunately for us, and fortunately for visitors like you, perhaps, there is a very small section of the island that has a resort on it, which is called Lizard Island Resort. And this is a photo of the view from one of the rooms. And it's a really inclusive sort of experience when you're staying there. You have all your meals included, your drinks, a whole lot of activities, and you can just get out and explore the area. And that involves something like this, going out and actually doing scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef, or even for those who are a little less active or a little less capable of scuba diving, you can do snorkeling. You can literally swim off the beach, and about 50, 100 meters, 150 yards off the beach, there's coral, there's giant clams, there's tropical fish. It's really an incredible place to go and visit. One of the other things that's great about it is that the island itself, aside from the resort, has one other facility on there, which is the Lizard Island Research Station. So you can see a photo there. And this is the world's premier coral reef research station. It's inhabited usually, I won't say during the current times, but usually by teams of scientists from all around the world. Norway, the UK, the US, Japan, whatever, anyone who's studying marine science, a lot of them come down and they'll spend a period of time, 1 or 2 months, staying on the island, not quite in as luxurious accommodation as the resort, but nevertheless still a beautiful destination, to do their research. And one of the things that you can actually do is go and do a tour of the research station where you spend some time with one of the scientists, and they'll actually talk you through what they do and how they do the research, and what they're trying to do to protect and preserve the incredible natural feature, which is the Great Barrier Reef. So this is actually my 2 daughters when we were there a few years ago on the tour. You can see the little one's happy holding a little starfish in her hands, a coral starfish. So it's great, and they loved it, my kids. They just thought it was so fascinating to see and to learn about the reef and how it's being protected.
It's interesting to just jump in right before we leave the reef and just to help people out in 2 ways. Most people go to the Great Barrier Reef and maybe just have a day or a half-day experience.
Correct.
And the difference between making a choice and going to stay on Lizard Island or one of the few islands that are around there is the opportunity to really get in depth and close to a lot of the reef. I've done the reef in 3 different ways, and it's a huge difference. And for anybody who is terrified about putting the tanks on and things like that, you really want to go to a place where there is so much wildlife and it's so well preserved that you'll be able to see it at any depth. And
Yeah.
Lizard Island, I think, is one of them. And my only other interjection is just to point out to everybody that getting around Australia often requires flights. So, Paul, you might want to help us out. So let's say we flew into Sydney. How do we get to Lizard Island if we wanted to visit?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Angela. So you're right. Flying is a big thing in Australia just because of the size of the country. To get to Lizard Island, you need to fly from Sydney to a place called Cairns, which is in far north Queensland. That's about a 3-hour flight. So that gives you an idea of the size of Australia. So it's about a 3-hour flight. And then from there, you actually connect onto a small plane flight, a charter flight that lasts for about an hour, that flies from Cairns almost directly north to land on Lizard Island. Lizard Island, as you can imagine, has a very small little sort of landing strip. So the planes are not big. They carry between 5 and 10 people. But the flight itself is actually really mind-blowing because, of course, you're flying in a small plane quite low over the reef. So you get to see what the reef looks like from up above, as part of the trip out to the island. So all in all, I mean, it works very smoothly. You get off the plane, off the big plane from Sydney or somewhere else, transfer to a little a terminal, and then jump on the small plane and fly over. And then when you're there, I mean, it's almost like a Caribbean sort of experience. You get collected in a golf buggy from the landing strip, and then 5 minutes later, you're at the resort. So it's really nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So next person that I wanted to talk about is this guy here, who I'm sure all of you know, Charles Darwin. And, he traveled around the world, including a trip to Australia in 1836. So he did a 5-year round the world voyage, on which, of course, he formulated the ideas that he had that went on to create the evolution of about the theory of evolution, as we call it, Darwin's theory of evolution. So he came to Australia, and he spent a lot of time traveling around. And one of the destinations that he traveled to is this place here called the Blue Mountains. Now, the Blue Mountains is about 2 hours from Sydney, but a world apart. As you can see there, the scenery is just incredible. And what Darwin did was he hired a man, which was an Indigenous man, an Indigenous guide, and a couple of horses. And he traveled inland to the Blue Mountains to get a general idea of the country. At that time, it certainly wouldn't have been a 2-hour journey, of course, because there were no roads or anything, and he would have been traveling through real wilderness. But he certainly commented in his journals and memoirs of the time of just how beautiful the area was and how magnificent the cliffs were and the trees and all those sorts of things. Now, one of the places that we know for sure that he visited, and again, I think it's so exciting to think that you could be going to places where these historic people have been and know for a fact that they've been there, is this place called Wolgan Valley. So Wolgan Valley is actually around 3 hours from Sydney. If you imagine that the city of Sydney is on the coast, then about 2 hours inland, there's this huge mountain range, the Blue Mountains, and then you have to cross over them, and on the other side of them is where this valley is. So Wolgan Valley it's now a luxury resort. For about 160 years or so, including the time when Charles Darwin was traveling there, which was the 19th of January in 1836, it was a farm. It was owned by some farmers who really were out there, like on the other side of the mountains, a long way from everywhere, really having to be completely self-sufficient. And he went out there and wrote a lot of pages in his book about the visit that he had, about how the cliffs had been formed. And while he was there, he did some scientific research, collecting rock samples, and also took part in a hunt of kangaroos. So the resort itself has been built there, and it's really a great place for a lot of reasons, which I'll talk about as we go through. But it's something that provides a very, very unique Australian experience. So this is just a picture of the inside of one of the villas. Each of the villas has a luxury, like a private plunge pool. So you've got your own pool that you can swim in. All luxury villas varying in size from 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. But what's great about it is that on the resort, they've actually retained some of the original architecture. And one of those is a homestead called the 1832 homestead. So that would have been in place when Darwin was there. And it's now been kept as a place that can be used. It's sort of a museum. You actually go inside and you can see artifacts from the time that they were living there, and photos and so on. The great thing about this as a destination is it really ticks some boxes for people who are wanting to travel and see some of Australia's very unique wildlife, which undoubtedly must have started at least planting some seeds into Darwin's mind about how animals exist like this in this place and not anywhere else in the world. So on the left there, you can see a photo with some kangaroos in it. There's in fact three types of animals that look like kangaroos that live in the valley. One's called a kangaroo, one's called a wallaby, and one's called a wallaroo. And they're all slightly different, but they all, bounce around and have little babies that grow in and stay in the mum's tummy in the little what do you call it? I can't remember. But the pouch. And then on the other side there, the right-hand picture is something called a wombat, which you might not know about. It's not as famous as a kangaroo, but it's another marsupial native only to Australia. And these live in little holes under the ground. They dig holes and they scout around mostly during the nighttime to feed on grass and things. So those two, you will literally wake up in the morning and there will be kangaroos sitting outside your window, or wombats. You'll almost trip over them when you're walking back from dinner down to your little villa and things. So it's a pretty unique and very up close experience with some of the wildlife. And obviously, as I was talking about with Lizard Island, there's all sorts of experiences that you can do. Here, there's a great range of wildlife rangers that will actually help you learn a little bit about the nature. And it's not only animals, actually. There's a very famous thing that took place in just right near Walgan Valley, which relates to a plant called the Wollemi fern. I don't know if anyone listening has heard of it. It's spelled Wollemi. And so this is a tree that is a very historic and ancient tree. And for many, many years, the only time that people had seen it was in fossils. So there was fossils of this branch and they had sort of named it and so on. And then, I'm not sure the exact time, but let's say 20 or 25 years ago, they thought that this tree didn't exist. And then someone happened to be going on a hike through the real bushland out in the middle of nowhere near Walgan Valley and found one alive, just the tree growing. And at the time, it was sort of touted as being like discovering a dinosaur, because it's a 200 or 300 million year old tree that was thought to be extinct and found in fossils, and then there it was, just growing there in the middle of the bush in a tiny little spot. So the Wollemi fern is a very famous tree that's right near the area. They have a couple of them on site that they've planted there, although the original location of them is kept as a top secret, because they obviously want to stop people from going in and touching them and damaging the environment where they've survived all that time. But back to the story, the great thing about this property is that they really care about the conservation. And in fact, it's an internationally award-winning resort, but based upon not only the experience you have there, but also the fact that they're spending a huge amount of time and resources trying to look after and rehabilitate the land. The land was farmed for about 150 or 160 years. So you can imagine, especially back in those days, they didn't really think about environmental protection of the land or the impact it was having to run cattle and to run sheep and things like that. So the resorts has a whole team of people that actually are working on the conservation. And this is a picture of someone planting a tree, and that's a great family experience. If there are people going as a family, that they run an activity thing called the Walgan Rangers, and my daughters have done it as well, where they actually spend a few hours with a ranger traveling out onto the property, learning about the property and how they're doing the conservation work, and sometimes, in fact, even planting a tree, as my girls did. So now, there's a little piece of them that's connected to the resort, and that they've planted a tree, a native tree, to help in the regrowth. So it's a really, really exceptionally good place to travel around. Did you want to jump in with anything there, Angela, or
You know
should I
me,
kick
I'm
on
always
with?
jumping in. I have to just say that what I love about it is most people want to go to Sydney for a period of days. And this idea of getting into the Blue Mountains and then going into the Wolgan Valley is brilliant from so many perspectives. The first is you're trying to get your body acclimated to a whole new world. And this is really 3 hours away, 2 to 3 hours away by car, an absolutely beautiful drive, and somewhere that takes you out of what would be a main city center, the largest in the whole country, and then brings you right what it feels like to me, like an Australian safari, you know, the
Yeah,
idea that you can
absolutely.
really get out and see all of these animals up close and central. So I would just plant the seeds there for definitely multi-generational travel to this area, just so easy. And you can see so much without having to fly sometimes those 3-4 hours to see some of that wildlife in different parts of the country. But yeah, highly recommend. In fact, I love
Yeah, I agree. And I would actually say that one thing that we do a lot, although it seems a bit counterintuitive, is we actually recommend that people, when you fly from the US, you'll often land in the morning, early in the morning, 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So you're a bit tired, and for you guys, the longest flight you'll probably ever do, fly from Sydney to London, and you'll know what a long flight is. But anyway, um, and what we do is often we'll recommend that people go and spend 3 nights in that resort straight away. Don't even go into the city, just get in the car and keep on going. And the reason behind that is one, I mean, when you're there, there is absolutely no doubt in your mind that you're in Australia. There's kangaroos and there's, wombats and there's beautiful scenery. And it's just in your face that you've made it to this place that you've been hopefully dreaming about traveling to for such a long time. Um, but also because it's a great destination that it's not essential that I guess if you're in a city, you feel I've got 2 days here, I have to see as much as I can, and you're trying to power on through, and the jet lag's hurting and you're tired, and so it's not a problem that you can go there, and if you want to have a bit of downtime and have a swim or have a little afternoon nap or just have a relaxing G&T with the sun setting or something like that, you can do that without feeling like you're missing out on seeing things. Whereas if you hit a city as your first destination, you often think, I've got to really just keep on going. So we often do that. We'll recommend people go straight there, have 3 nights, and by the time you're done there, then you've sort of covered the jet lag a bit and you've seen some great things, and then you can get on and explore other destinations. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to kick on to our third adventurer. I won't say he's a real person. Obviously, Mick Dundee. I'm sure many of you know who he is from the very famous 80s movies. There were about 3, I think. The first one was good. I'm not sure about the next couple. But that was obviously a very iconic story about a very Australian character called Mick Dundee, played by Paul Hogan. And it was sort of a fish out of water story, as you'll recall, where a man went from being up in the real wildlife in Australia and went to New York City and was had some interesting experiences. So he's a good person to think about in terms of the real remote and beautiful regional parts of Australia up in the northern part of what we call the Northern Territory. We're not very inventive with names. That part, that's the Northern Territory up there. So there's places called Arnhem Land, which is an incredible national park area. And what I want to do here is just talk a little bit about another great place that you can go and visit, which is called Bamaroo Plains. So this is really a place where you can get almost, as I think Angela just mentioned before, a sort of Australian safari style experience. So these are mesh walled safari glamping tents. You wake up in the morning and you sort of see animals walking around outside. It's completely off the grid. It's all solar powered. There's no mobile service. There's no internet. There's no TV. I mean, it's really, you're out in the remote, really random places. But the reward for that, in terms of making that commitment to go somewhere so unique, is quite extravagant and exquisite. So this gives you a picture of the pool there. This is a destination, and I will cover it a little bit later on. That's very seasonal. You can really only travel during certain months of the year, which is when it's not the summertime, because it's a tropical destination. So when you're there, there's this, I mean, look at that scenery. It's incredible. And that's the photo that I took just with an iPhone, so you get a feel for just what a beautiful destination it is. When you're there, you're doing a whole range of safari activities. tours, airboating, bird watching, looking for crocodiles. At certain times of the year, you can do fishing for a very famous fish called barramundi, an Australian fish that can grow up to about 100 centimeters, a meter in length, which is probably about 60 or 70 inches, 60 inches perhaps. And it's really, a good fighting fish. If you're a fisherman, that's one fish that needs to be on your list. There's just a quick picture with a beautiful looking bird there, and I have to say I'm not necessarily a bird watcher. There are definitely people out there who that's their passion, and in fact the property has a number of the keeps where you can climb up high and sit in there and look for the bird life. But it's really fascinating, even for people who are not really into bird watching, to visit a place like this and see the incredible array of birds and wildlife there. So what you also get to see is crocodiles. So this is a picture of a crocodile that I took. I think you will be aware that they look a little bit like alligators. There are some differences. Interestingly, the main river up in Darwin, which is in the Northern Territory, is called the Alligator River, because at the time when they were exploring here, the Brits, they didn't realize that there was a thing called a crocodile, which is not an alligator, and they thought it was an alligator. So they're called Alligator River, but it's actually all crocodiles in there. Alligators are a little bit smaller than crocodiles, and they have a sort of narrower snout. You can see that it's got quite a big nose here, and they're very big, these things. I mean, they're huge and much more deadly than alligators. I will take a minute, if we've got time, I think we do, to tell an interesting story about this. So when I went to Bamaroo Plains, which was about May, probably three years ago, I suppose, I was fortunate enough to be traveling there with this lovely group of ladies from the US who were, like Angela is, a travel advisor. And they were coming down on a trip to learn about Australia and the destinations that that they can sell to their clients who want to visit. And we went out on a safari. We were driving out at sort of sunset, almost sunset, and it was like an African safari. You drive around and you look at animals and you stop and have some canapes, and it's pretty nice. And we pulled up in one little spot, and we were looking, and the guide was with us, was telling us all about the wildlife and so on. And out in the water, we just sort of saw something going on. And I'll segue for a little bit to say that in Australia, we have these things called wild horses. So the British introduced horses, and they're called brumbies. So they're sort of horses that were brought here by the Brits. They then go on and just breed and go out into and they're a problem, actually. They're a bit of a pest. They cause damage to the land and stuff. But anyway, there's lots of them around, and they're horses, so they're quite beautiful looking. So there we are, and there's a bit of splashing around in the water, and we look out, and in the water there's a horse splashing around, and an alligator, sorry, not an alligator, a crocodile, basically attacking it. And as it happened, I just by coincidence was at the front of the truck. So I was watching it, and all of these lovely ladies from the US were behind me. And I have to say, like, every ounce of my body wanted that crocodile to take down that horse, because it was like, being in a National Geographic documentary and thinking, oh, I'm going to see a crocodile. So what had actually happened was the horse had put its head down to drink some water. The croc had attacked it and damaged its face, but didn't kill it. And then the horse was sort of splashing around, and the crocodile was swimming around trying to catch it. It actually didn't catch it. But the funny thing about why I mentioned I was at the front of the vehicle was I was watching it and just enthralled by it. And I turned around, and all four of the ladies were crying because it was a horse, and they were sad that the horse had been attacked by the crocodile. So it was an interesting experience. I just sort of had to zip it for a minute, but later on over a drink, I did tell them that I really, really was wishing that the crocodile had caught the horse, and they sort of accepted. They understood why I felt like that. But it was an amazing experience, obviously, to see a crocodile actually in the water hunting and trying to catch something to eat. This is just a quick photo of the air boating experience, I guess similar to the sort of thing that you can do down in Florida, and see some alligators down there. And then I thought I'd just completely segue unless you've got anything you want to talk about, Angela, quickly. No. Um, I've talked about a few different characters, and I hope that's been interesting to learn about different places and different things, different people that have influenced the story of Australia. But one other story that I thought might be relevant to cover off a little bit was something. If any of us can remember the time pre-COVID, there were actually other things on the front page of the newspaper, and this was one of them. So this is the front page of the New York Times from the 1st of January 2020, when, as I'm sure you all recall, the world was really sort of caught by surprise as to what was happening in Australia and the ferocity of the bushfires and so on. So I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about that, because COVID then did come along and knock that off the front page. And probably what no one really knows is that since then, there has been an incredible recovery in terms of the wildlife and the country of Australia. And that started, one, because we had this huge amount of rain, unseasonably warm weather causing the bushfires, and then unseasonably huge amounts of rain that caused all the bushfires to go out, and in fact started the regeneration of the nature after the bushfires. So it's perhaps a little known fact that the history of Australia is one that has bushfires springing all the way through it. And if you read any books of the history of Australia and the ancient explorers and the indigenous people as well, they actually had techniques within the way that they managed the land, where they would set fire on purpose to the trees, to set it on fire, to burn it down, because they knew then that would regenerate the land. So that's actually the story of what's happened in Australia since those bushfires at the start of 2020. One of the destinations that was most badly affected was a place called Kangaroo Island, which is off the coast of South Australia. And it's something that we call Australia's Galapagos. It's got a huge range of wildlife and experiences that you can have, where you can see marine wildlife and land wildlife and so on. It was pretty badly affected. The island itself is not very big, but about 60% of the land was destroyed by the bushfires, including one of our most famous luxury lodges that was burnt down on about the 3rd of Jan. And it's a good news story though now, because there has been a huge recovery in terms of the wildlife. This is some of the sea lions that you can see there, and also koalas. And so the koalas have really been thriving. In fact, prior to the bushfires, there was a problem with overpopulation of the koalas. There was too many on the island for that the trees and so on could handle. So, nature has a way of working those things out. So obviously a lot of the koalas perished during the bushfires, but the ones that have remained are actually now really doing well, because they've got more food and they're able to move around a little bit more. And we're constantly in contact with the people that work down there, the guides, and they're all just telling us just how fabulous the experiences are in terms of wildlife now. Even ironically, the things like the fact that the trees have been, a lot of the trees were damaged, means that the wildlife needs to get out a little bit more to find food, and so they're seeing lots more bird life. They're seeing lots more animals walking around in places that are visible to humans because of the change of the landscape there. So don't always think that everything has a bad ending. There's even those bushfires have a very positive ending in terms of the way the nature has recovered. So there's a map which gives you an indication of some of the destinations that we have talked about, which is Sydney, the Great Barrier Reef, Kakadu National Park up in the top northern part, Uluru sort of in the middle, and Kangaroo Island down off the coast of South Australia. I thought it might be good to share with you a little bit in terms of just when's a good time to come and travel and what to see. And I think, as it says on the bottom of the slide there, the best thing about Australia is that there is absolutely always a good time to come here. It's because it's such a big country. and we have a sort of a section of the land that's the tropical north, and then a temperate sort of southern area. At any time of the year, there's a great place to visit. The places that I guess if you're thinking about the main headline locations that you would know about, places like Sydney, Melbourne, Tasmania, South Australia, Kangaroo Island, those sorts of places, they're all in the southern part. So they are most suitable for traveling to during our spring, summer and fall. So springtime here is obviously the opposite. Spring starts in September and runs through until the end of November. Summer is from December through until the end of Feb, and then we're already now in our fall. So that's the best time to travel in the southern parts of Australia. And then the northern parts, so places like the Great Barrier Reef, like Bamaroo that I just showed you before, like the Red Centre, all of those, then, they're sort of more not in the summer months because it's just too crazy hot. I mean, in Ayers Rock, for example, and those places up in the Northern Territory, 100+ degrees, plus the tropical sort of rainfall and those sorts of things that don't make it overly pleasant as a destination to travel to at that time of year. But as I said right at the beginning, there's always an opportunity to travel around Australia to somewhere where there's nice weather. My personal favorites are probably around the September, October time. I think that's a really nice shoulder season where you'll be starting to get some nice weather in the southern destinations, but the places up in the north, like the Great Barrier Reef and so on, they're not so crazy hot that it's unbearable to visit. So that's I would say my personal suggestion as a time to travel around. That's pretty much it from me. As you can sort of see from the places that we've spoken about, and also just here the variety of different images. Right at the start, I think I said we've got everything that you want: history, nature, great food and wine, sport. We've got it all. So all you guys need to do is just come on down.
I love it, Paul. And I couldn't agree more in terms of food and wine and culture, things to do. I have enjoyed tremendously working and living there slightly, not too much. But we do have some questions coming in. Some of the
Great.
questions may be around, for Americans, this is probably one of the furthest places that they will travel generally around the world, unless you do kind of like me. And I did do the Sydney back to London, back to New York route, which, if you want to go around the world at least once, you can do it. But that being said, tell us about how people typically plan. Is the 2-week rule a good rule for Australia, more or less? Tell us what works in your experience.
That's a good question. And I think, absolutely, it's not a destination given the travel time and also the time zone differences and things that you'd really want to be doing for much less than 2 weeks. Generally, what we'll find is that people will come down and in a 2-week period, they'll probably look at including, say, 3 to 4 destinations. And that could be something like perhaps into Sydney, some time in Walgan Valley, maybe then out to Uluru to see Ayers Rock and so on. And then from there up to far north Queensland, Great Barrier Reef type thing, and then back to Sydney and then out. So definitely two weeks, I think, is what you should be aiming for. And a question that comes up to us a lot, and I'm sure is something that's in some of the listeners' mind is, well, since I'm going all that way, should I do Australia and New Zealand together? And the short answer is generally no, if you can avoid it. And the reason is that on a map, they might look close to each other, but it's actually about 4 hours to fly from Sydney to New Zealand. So that in itself is a whole day once you factor in time zones, and there's a couple of hours time difference between us and New Zealand. So often people do it, and we do it all the time, but it tends to be then you sort of have to go, okay, well, I'm going to spend 10 days in Australia and just have 3 or 4 nights in New Zealand, or the other way around. But if you can at all possible do it, I would suggest focus on Australia as one visit and then focus on New Zealand as another.
Yes, and we certainly have a great listener. Thank you, William Brown, for sharing. He says, yes, 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, just to see South, Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales,
Yeah,
Queensland, and Northern Territories.
yeah.
Yes, I do think so. I think it's well worth investing the time as you are going to invest the money to travel. And what I love that Paul has shared today is something that's off the beaten path. You know, if you do a quick Google of Australia, you're going to be served up things and ways that people have traveled in before that they feel are most efficient. But that doesn't necessarily work for you, what your interests are, where you want to see, and what would make your travel dreams come true. So there is a lot of opportunity to diversify and personalize as well to make this
Mm.
experience worth it. Um, do you have a question about mistakes? I got a text and said, so Paul, in your experience, what are the greatest mistakes people make when they do travel to Australia? If you
The
could help them
greatest
avoid
mistakes.
something, what would it be?
Um, I think probably, Angela, the greatest mistake would be almost something that just connects to that whole I want to see Australia and New Zealand in 2 weeks. My feeling is the mistake is to try and squeeze too much in. You need to recognize that it's a destination that's not one like I'm trying to think of somewhere, but it's not a Caribbean island. It's not somewhere where you can just go there and do everything that you need to do and still have lots of downtime there. So I really think the mistake is just thinking to yourself, well, here's the 7 things I want to do, and I'm prepared to do 2 nights in every single location to tick all those boxes off. One of the things that I believe to be true absolutely is that it's Australia is not a destination that people go away disappointed from. I really think it's worth the money, it's worth the time, it's worth the planning. And I think the thing that makes it special is that the people are very friendly. There's some really incredible places, and it's just nice to have some time to just relax and enjoy. We do live a pretty relaxed lifestyle in Australia. That's one of the things that I guess people would use to a word to describe Australians is that we're relaxed, and we're very fortunate that we live in a beautiful place where we've got beautiful beaches and beautiful scenery. And like every day almost, I walk from my house and walk down to the water, and not a beach but through some bush. And you just got to, don't make the mistake of just thinking you've got to squeeze everything in. Give yourself some time to just take in where you are and go off the beaten track a little bit.
Wow, that's phenomenal advice. And just as I'm asking for any other questions or comments from people who may have traveled to Australia, if I could
Mm,
just layer in as well that Australia is one of these destinations with incredible events. If you are a tennis fan, if you are a fan of food and wine, if you are a fan of lighting, they light up in a light show. The Sydney Opera
mm,
House, I mean, there's these festivals that maybe you haven't heard of before, but are really quite well known in that part of the world and also
mm.
phenomenal. So if there are opportunities for people to go, is staying in touch with Tourism Australia? Where do people read more? Where do people stay in touch with what's going on in the Australian landscape that they can know more about?
Yeah, I mean, Tourism Australia for sure. We would love you to find Southern Crossings on Instagram and Facebook and follow us. And we're always trying to share, as much as we can about those sorts of events. Yeah, and obviously, it's something that we help with at the time when someone's talking about a trip with us. As I said right at the beginning, I think we really aim to tailor the experience to what people are interested in. So if they have a real desire to do some food and wine sort of experiences, then we might recommend that they travel at a certain time because there's some sort of festival on, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely have to keep in touch with folks. So if there aren't any other questions, though, we are going to just pass on through to a few travel tips we have. I'm going to leave you with a few tips because people are beginning to get excited again about travel. And I have just 3 simple things that are spring cleaning for everybody listening. The first has to do with our passports. I can't tell you the number of very disappointed calls I've gotten recently when people check their passports. And I know that you and I think that the time has just stood still, but some of those expiration dates are out there. So do yourself a favor and renew or apply for a passport now and save yourself the hassle in the future. But the second has to do with planning. And just to give you a sense, Paul, please weigh in here. But in my experience, people plan to go to Australia, New Zealand, maybe 12, maybe even 18 months out. Generally, it is a destination that, hey, it's a bucket list destination for people. It's somewhere you've saved up for. It's somewhere you want to get excited for. And so for that reason too, I do tell you that there are all these people who had planned to go in 2020 and all these people who had hoped to go in 2021, and they are ready to go or have credits on file that will be used, we hope, into 2022 and 23. So if it is your intention to go, it is good time now to set some plans in motion. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to put money down on the books, but definitely start the conversation with family, with friends, with loved ones, and to think about where you too want to go when things are possible to travel again. Now, I'm sure people do trips in the short term too. And I bet when things open, people will literally just fly somewhere where they really want to go. But in our experience, generally, Australia is one of those destinations that requires a bit of thought and forethought and planning, for sure.
Definitely. And if I could jump in there, I would say certainly that is the case for traveling at our busiest time, which is what we call the festive. So basically, obviously, I think one item that's on many people's bucket list is to be in Sydney for New Year's Eve, to watch the fireworks and all that sort of stuff, which is really incredible. And that is a time that it's really, really busy, and certainly something that, in a normal year, people would be booking now and planning now for travel for Christmas time this year. It comes to a good question, I suppose, which is, what about Christmas time this year? And we're a little bit unsure as to whether it will be possible for international visitors to come, but we remain hopeful that will be the case. It's been far too long since we haven't been able to welcome any of our friends from the US and all around the world. But certainly, if people are talking about traveling next year, your advice is absolutely on the money, Angela. It's really there's just incredible demand, and there's so many people who have rolled trips over from 2020 to 2021 and potentially to 2022. So if you, and especially I would say, if you're thinking about traveling to destinations which have just a natural sort of maximum capacity of people that can visit, so that would be places like the Kimberley, which we didn't really talk about today, but it's an incredible wildlife area up in the northern part of Western Australia. All the cruises, I mean, they run cruises there, and this is just for domestic only this year. Every single cruise there is completely full this year. There's not even, you cannot get a space on one. And that's knocking over to next year. So we've already got some international visitors from the US and the UK that have booked their cruise for 2022 in the Kimberley, because they just know how much demand there's going to be. So definitely, if you're thinking about things, it's time to at least start to plan them out, because you don't want to get to the point where you decide that May, June next year is the right time to travel, and that you want to see some of those really remote places, and it's not possible.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And Vicky came in with a great last question, which is actually,
yes,
hey, if I really want to focus on landscape and animals and Uluru and the Great Barrier Reef, is that possible to do as well while avoiding cities? And I would say yes and no. First of all, we got to fly into that big old city first and foremost. So you got to land. And for most people, that does mean to climatize. But I think that Paul gave some remarkable suggestions. And I will say that Southern Crossings has some remarkable itineraries already done that I'd be happy to send you. But basically, he would maybe recommend flying right out and going to maybe Wolgan Valley, then making your way right up through Uluru. It would be a couple of flights, but we can get you right up into just a complete animal experience, as I think is rarely spoken about. I have been to the Galapagos, but the amount of wildlife you can see in Australia would not only be side by side, I think, with the Galapagos, but even more. It is incredibly rich and incredibly diverse. I mean, you saw the sea lions, all the way to this kind of, we didn't even speak about birds, but even in the middle of the city, Sydney has botanical gardens right there, and you can see this wide variety of bird life before you even go into any of the territories or the landscape. So there is so much to see that I am pretty sure we would be able to do it for you anytime in 3 weeks. But Grace has a really good question, and I'm not sure I can pronounce this. Kokkas, a quokka.
Yes, quokka.
Okay.
So I might just.
What is a quokka? I do not know.
I might just jump in for a second onto Vicky's question. And what I would suggest, Vicky, then if you're more interested in the landscapes, the animals, Uluru and the reef and so on, is that you should definitely be looking for a trip mid-year, not our summertime. The beaches and the cities and stuff are really the places, as I talked about before, because they're in the south, they really shine in the summertime. I think a destination for you to absolutely put on a list if you're looking at that, landscapes, animals and so on, would be that far north part of Western Australia. So the Kimberley, like I mentioned before, where you can do some incredible cruises, and they're sort of 1 week or 2 week cruises that you could fit into an overall trip, a 1 week trip. A lot of the cruises will they'll start near Darwin, so in the Northern Territory, near Bamaroo, where we talked about, and sail then across into Western Australia and end up in a place called Broome, which is in far north Western Australia. So to give you an example, my wife's parents are doing a trip later this year, and they'll be flying from Sydney, doing a couple of nights at Bamaroo, then going and jumping on a cruise ship and cruising for a week, and then finishing in a place called Cable Beach. There's an incredible place called Ningaloo Reef, which is in Western Australia, in the far north of Western Australia, where you can, again, during that period from sort of March through until about September, swim with either whale sharks or not great white sharks, whale sharks, or another type of whale. Sorry, the name skips me for a minute. But that's an incredible experience where you're literally in the water swimming with these whale sharks that are one of the biggest animals in the whole world, right up close and personal. And that's that sort of experience I think would be perfect for you. But as I said, Vicky, probably that, May, June, July would be a good time to come if that's what more interests you, because that's a good time to visit the reef, a good time to visit that central and northern Australia and see the landscapes and things. Yeah. So in answer to Grace's question about the quokkas, a quokka is a very small little, very super cute marsupial, I think it is. It was made famous a couple of years ago by one of the Hemsworth brothers. I don't know which one it was, maybe Chris, who sort of promoted this, take a quokka, a selfie with a quokka. They're in a place called Rottnest Island, Rottnest, Rottnest Island, which is off the coast of Western Australia. So you can do it in a day trip from Perth, which is the capital of Western Australia. So yeah, they're pretty cool. And in fact, Rottnest Island is a location where just in the last 6 months or so, they've opened a new glamping style accommodation that you can stay in on the island. So it's definitely possible to do it as a day trip from Perth, but you can also go and stay on the island and see the quokkas. Yeah.
And get that great t-shirt. My auntie went to Rottnest Island and all she got me was a picture of the quokka. I love it. That is incredible. You learn something new every time, folks. Paul, we are going to have you back because this was amazing and so informative for so many of us. I've been and learned a ton. People who have been able to share their experiences, and we hope that any of you at home are able to listen, learn, and maybe go to the Mark Twain Library, get a travel guide, certainly reach out to us. We have digital travel guides or Hoopla. Many of our digital resources have more information to read, but we can always be found to listen, learn more, and listen again to this recording if you loved it. but I know that Paul has a full day ahead of us. You have a full evening ahead of us for anyone who's listening to us on the East Coast. So we would like to thank you very, very much for tuning in. Paul, we are so grateful for your time and grateful
Pleasure.
for your support of the Mark Twain Library, as we are a not-for-profit, beautiful library based in Reading, Connecticut, and always thankful for your support. We will have a
Great.
couple more series coming up, and I will give you a hint that Paul's colleague in New Zealand will be proving him wrong insofar as to say that you need to spend more time in New Zealand, coming up on March 28th. And then we have more travel series coming up in April. But we are incredibly grateful to everyone here this evening. Thank you again, Paul. And we wish
Thank
you
you.
all a wonderful day or a good day. And we will see you in Australia soon, we hope. Until then, stay safe.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.